Welcome to this next SolidWorks course installment. Today we'll be making some solids. So here I've got our old friend, the tape holder, pulled up, and let's go over how to make a solid with it. First off, you have things on the sketch ribbon, and all of these are dedicated to generating sketches. To make solids, the features menu is dedicated to generating and modifying solids. Probably the simplest way to start making solids is the extruded boss base. So you see we have a sketch that is what we call enclosed. I can go all the way around and there's no breaks in the border. The whole thing is enclosed. Now SolidWorks 2017 shows us an enclosed figure by highlighting the center, this kind of purplish color. SolidWorks 2016, 2015, 2014 doesn't have that feature, so the inside will be the same color as the outside. It's not quite as easy to recognize something that is enclosed. But if you're dealing with something enclosed, at least in 2017, you have this to tell you. So to make this solid, and it is easiest to make solids out of enclosed sketches, just hit the Extruded Boss Base button, and you can see it automatically recognizes the enclosed sketch. And if you understand the extrusion in the manufacturing process, this is just like extruding when you manufacture. It's pushing a solid out of the sketch plane in the shape of whatever enclosed sketch that you have. So you can specify how far you want to extrude it. I'm going to do 1.25 inches. And it gives us certain options here. I'll go through these in just a minute, but right now it defaults to blind, so I'll do a blind extrusion. And we have a solid, and I can use that center mouse button wheel to rotate our view and look at the solid that is generated from this. Maybe I can extrude a few other things. If you remember our good friend the flange, we made this in an earlier video, we can extrude this as well. You can see that when I have an enclosed figure within an enclosed figure, it gets darker in these spaces. So if I hit the Extruded Boss Base, it automatically recognizes what I want to do. Now let's say I wanted to do something different. I can go to selected contours and say nope, I want to do just this, and it will extrude just that hole, and the rest of the sketch will be irrelevant. Or I can choose these if I wanted to. So I can choose whatever contours I want to extrude. Of course I intended for it to be this. So when I extrude this flange, maybe we'll make it 1/4 inch plate. There it is. And hit the check mark. There's our flange. Pulling up the tape again, let me give you some other examples of ways you can extrude things. When I hit the extrude button, notice it is from the sketch plane. In other words, my sketch is on a plane. In this case, it is on the front plane. So it's saying push it out from the front plane. So this covers where you're extruding from. This covers the actual extrusion. So I can go ahead and switch which direction. Let me make that extrusion longer so you can see. Do I want to extrude on this side of the plane or this side of the plane? And what distance do I want? 1.25 perhaps. I can also choose something like mid-plane, and that does both sides of the plane. That is a very, very good one to use. I wish SolidWorks would default to the mid-plane, because when you go to add a feature on one side, you can mirror it across this plane to the other side, which we'll be going over later on. So mid-plane is probably the best way to make an extrusion, in my humble opinion. You can also go up to vertex, up to surface, offset from surface, and up to body, which I will be covering shortly. So when I extrude this mid-plane, boom, there we go. Now the great thing is I can choose other things to sketch on that aren't planes. I just need a perfectly flat surface. Notice this is a perfectly flat surface like a plane, and so is this and this and this. This is not a perfectly flat surface, this is a curved surface. But just about any other surface I can choose to sketch on because they're all flat. So if I want to make a sketch, I can sketch on this plane and say, go to the sketch menu and say sketch. And now whatever lines that I make, they're projected on the plane of that surface. So anytime you're working with a solid, you can sketch on these parts and it would work. Maybe I can complete this sketch because we need a place for the tape to sink into. So if I can click on this surface and push Control 8, and I can start sketching. Notice, just like in a regular sketch, I can go to a surface and it will show me the midpoint. So I can make a construction line that attaches to both lines' midpoints and make it horizontal. And that shows that this whole sketch will be in the middle of the tape holder. Now I can give this a dimension, perhaps 3/4 of an inch, and I can give this 1/4 inch, and I can give this, what do you say, 4 inches. I can extrude, and this will be a very good example of some of the things you come across when you extrude. Now, we just did an extruded boss base, this guy. And what we did is we added material from the sketch. We can do an extruded cut, which is the same thing except it takes material away. And what I want to do is make a place for the tape to sit in, so I can use the sketch to cut into this tape holder. I choose extruded cut, and it gives me a certain distance. Let's say I want to go a 1/2 inch deep. We'll probably want to go something more like 1 inch will be the height of the thing, so we'll go 0.75, and we've cut into the figure. Now, a few things to observe here. First, I've got this little lip, and why do I have this lip here? If I go back and notice, I should point this out as well, the history tree, every time we make an extrusion, records the fact that we've extruded the body of the tape and that we've made a second extruded cut. And under the boss extrude and cut extrude, you can click that little arrow and it gives you the sketch that we made. So there's our sketch, and if we have to change anything, you can right click and choose Edit Sketch on the menu. So if I do this cut extrude, right click, Edit Sketch, I can make any changes I want to the sketch that I just made. I'm happy with the sketch, but as you can see, the sketch goes into the solid, so when we cut downward, this little top is still here. So let's go over some ways that we can deal with that, because there's several ways that I can get it to cut in both directions. I'll hit this rebuild traffic light, which will automatically re-extrude what I just my extruded cut. And if I want to change the way that I extrude, I can go to this cut extrude, right click and say edit feature. Now, so you can see what's happening. The sketch goes below that surface, and so we are not cutting that top surface. One way to deal with this is to say from blind to mid plane, and then I can just make it deeper, 1.5, and so I'm cutting in both directions to about the same depth that I was before. This is not ideal, because what if I have something above here? It works in this part, but if I have something above here that I don't want to be cutting, and I end up cutting it because I have to make it so large to go as deep as I need to, that it might not work out. So I'll go back to blind. I'll go back to 0.5 7.5. So if a mid-plane doesn't work, I can go and select, or I should just check this box and extrude into another direction. And I can change this direction independently of what I'm already extruding. So I can always choose direction 2, and that gives me that nice edge that I'm looking for. Another thing I can do, if I don't want to do that, let's say I have to hug this surface. Well, I can say up to surface, and I can choose this surface, and it will only cut and stop right at the surface. So that's a pretty good one too, because then I'm not really going above my sketch plane at all, except for hitting this surface. Maybe I can give you another example on that. If I sketch here, and I'll go Control 8, and whatever sketch that we do, it's always important to make sure that it's fully constrained, because nobody will trust a sketch that isn't fully constrained. We'll go ahead and dimension that to be, say, 1/2 inch by 0.6 by 1.5. What I can do is, if I wanted to add a ridge, do a boss extrude where I add material, I can say Features, Extruded Boss Base, and I can choose up to surface like we did before, and it only extrudes on this surface and nowhere else. It doesn't go into the body or anything. So it's a very clean way to extrude things, if I wanted to add that little feature there for some reason. Now, we've covered up to surface. Up to vertex is also a very similar thing. Whoops. I'll just edit this feature. When I choose up to vertex, so if I choose up to vertex, I can choose an edge, and it extrudes down to the level of that edge. So if I clear that, and I can choose this edge if I want it to go a little bit deeper. So a surface is a face like, I should say surface is a face like this. A vertex is an edge like this. Up to next enables us to extrude up to the next feature, which in this case it automatically detects as this face. So up to next is basically up to surface, but it automatically chooses the first thing that the extrusion runs into. Through all goes to the very, very end point of the part. This is especially handy when doing an extruded cut, because you can cleanly cut through the entire part without having to specify a certain length. Offset from surface says if I want to go, say, 1/4 inch above this surface, or 1/4 inch above this, but I don't want to have to do the math or measure it out, I can simply say 0.25, and it automatically stops 1/4 inch above this bottom surface that I specified. So that's offset from surface. And up to body, it chooses the entire part, and it extrudes only to the entire part, or the entire body itself. That is all the different ways that you can extrude. Another thing that I can do if I want to is I can change from the sketch plane. I can choose offset, and that means I want to go 1/4 inch above what my sketch is. Well, now I'm extruding from a quarter inch above this sketch onto the body. What I can also do is blind it and go down into the body, or I can say, and this is an interesting thing, when I choose up to surface, it continues the curvature of the surface without going onto this face because I only specify this surface. I can't choose two, it only lets me choose one surface on up to surface. So that's where up to body fits in, because it will allow me to do multiple surfaces on a single body. I can also extrude from a surface. So if I choose this surface, then it will move the sketch onto this bottom surface and extrude from there. It's kind of a more simple way of saying offset, because I can choose the surface that I want to offset onto instead of calculating out a distance. Vertex is the same thing. Remember, vertexes are more like edges, so I can choose the height of that edge to extrude from. So that's extruding, and that is just about every extrusion feature you could ever want. If there's any confusion whatsoever, just stick with blind and mid-plane, and as you play around with some of the other extrusion options, it becomes pretty clear how they work and what to do. Join me next time, and we will cover another way of making solids. See you then.